It's inevitable with a long-running series like Pokémon that people will want to debate which entry is the best and the true peak of the franchise. It's a polarizing discussion with passionate arguments on every side, especially when you're talking about Pokémon fans. We're kinda crazy. And how ironic is it that no games have been more polarizing and controversial than Generation 5's Pokémon Black and White? And it's easy to see why. Just look at the game. Its pixel art is unmatched on the DS. The battling feels quicker and snappier than ever before. And the story. It's touched the hearts of more fans than maybe any other entry in the franchise. It felt like the natural evolution of the series up until this point. But it's also one that is rife with controversy. Many people will die on the hill that Icirrus cannot be a Pokemon, and it's also the first time Game Freak decided to force the fans to try new Pokemon and abandon the safety of choosing their favorite balls. And for myself, in 2011, I was the quintessential Pokemon freak. If I wasn't playing it after school, I was most definitely researching Pokemon, scouring Cerebi, going frame by frame through every announcement trailer. Pokemon wasn't just a hobby, it was a full-blown personality trait. It was embarrassing. But this time period also marked a shift, and that's important to understanding why this game was so controversial, as the fan base was only getting older, expecting more out of the games and frankly getting tired of that same old Pokemon formula. And for me, I was entering high school at this time where many of my friends were moving over to Call of Duty or Skyrim for their virtual fix and abandoning their childhood favorites for being childish. But for the first time in their goddamn existence, Game Freak finally decided to read the room and attempted to make some big changes to recapture that aging audience. Generation 5 felt different. And Masuda himself has even confirmed this, spending about a year thinking about how to design new aspects that would be perceived as cool and cutting edge by adults. The Pokemon were more angular, even over-designed in some cases, and we weren't just a chubby little 10-year-old anymore, we were a geriatric child of 14. And that seemingly small shift worked. Friends of mine who had skipped Heart Gold and Soul Silver came back for this. Game Freak didn't just tweak things, they expanded what the series could be. And I want to dive into those changes because they had a massive impact on the game itself. I think the best place to start is of course the beginning and the main themes this game represents, and its overall presentation, that make answering the question, is Pokemon Black and White still peak, one of the most polarizing discussions we've had so far. One of my favorite things going back to Black and White is seeing how the tone for this game is set in the first 40 seconds. Now the rest is just okay, but watching this for the first time, it's apparent that you're in for something a little bit different from a Pokemon game. It's one of the only times we're presented with a Pokemon game intro where it dares the player to start formulating questions from second one. Who is this boy? Why is he being crowned? What is this awesome art style? And is this us? Are we the king of Pokemon this time? The first time I saw this, I was mesmerized by its early presentation and even got some chills for the potential it presents. Does it live up to that potential? No. Because when you get into the game, it turns out you're just a normal kid in a normal little town. But the fascination from that intro never really ended. It just morphed into a different feeling. While the uncertain nature dissipated a little, it's replaced with a feeling of home and serenity, as Nuvema Town is one of my favorite Pokemon hometown soundtracks ever. And much like Generation 4, the atmosphere and world of Unova is one of the biggest draws of this Pokemon game, and it's really amplified by the technical advancements that Gen 5 made to make this game not only feel beautiful, but like it's running on a whole new system. It's pretty well known that Unova was based on New York City, and this was the first time they had gone outside Japan for inspiration. In creating the game, Masuda was inspired by the city's different nationalities, individual communities, and street festivals. What a party animal. And the first few towns are pretty small and rural, nothing out of the norm from a Pokemon game, but by the time you get to Nacrene, that's where the game starts to flex its muscles to sell the fantasy of being bigger and bolder Bigger and bolder game. I don't know why that's in the script. Nacrene is full of culture and history. It's built on the bones of an old railroad station. I've always connected with this town as a kid in the region for the general train theme that's going on here. Growing up, I was surrounded by train tracks in every direction. I remember being intrigued on where do these tracks lead to? A new secret area with a mythical Pokemon? who's to say? It's actually nothing. It's abandoned. There's also a museum filled with history and artifacts, and there's even a guy who will play his accordion along with the town theme, and I gotta say how much I love this touch. They do it a couple more times in the game, but it's one of my favorite touches that really adds to the environment of these towns and makes it feel like the NPCs are a part of the world and actually living here and just living out their day-to-day and doing what they love to do outside of just Pokemon battling. It adds some depth to the NPCs and the towns in this game that really add to that atmosphere. But I think the most impressive part about this game isn't that they've added a lot of diversity, but the diversity of scale for the towns. After a long cinematic jog across one of the largest bridges in the region with some excellent framing to make sure you respect this fucking bridge and all the pixels that built it, you end up in Castelia City, which is the largest city Pokemon has ever attempted to date. The intensity and scale of the city is so large it warps the pixels on the screen to depict that feeling of what it's like running around a major city as a small child. Businessmen buzzing around long endless street lined with fun NPCs playing music, of course creepy alleyways with suspicious weirdos. I also have some strong memories of being a nuisance and running into those businessmen on the main street trying to block their path and to see what they would do. Not sure if anyone else did this, but I don't know. It was fun, and it was a fun way to add a little extra spice when you're hatching an egg or something. Are you really spending your time as a kid effectively if you're not being a nuisance? But my favorite city in Unova is without a doubt Nimbasa City. That's where I spent most of my time as a kid. Again, it has some stellar music and one of my favorite soundtracks in the game, but it is also so much more lively than Castelia. Entertainment, sports, theme parks, musical theater, and the battle subway, of course. Now this is the America I know. Dude, I don't know. I spend so much time playing the battle subway and going through these different little attractions. Even the battle subway just ferries you into the middle of the forest. I don't know. It was my favorite way to practice my battling expertise. We'll talk about a little bit more later. But going through these early game towns, it's apparent they wanted each one of them to have a different vibe built by the NPCs' unique buildings and side activities, as well as the music to kind of represent something else or some other facet of American culture. And there's one town in particular I think everyone remembers for its goddamn music. This starts our string of towns that are all about industry, with Driftveil being a port city all about shipping goods and Mistralton being about shipping food by way of cargo plane. And that really helps build that industrial side of America. Those heavy capitalistic vibes we all love. But I mean, I think everyone really remembers a lot of these towns for the music. It's impossible not to enter a city and turn up the volume on your DS to the max and bop your head for at least a little bit. And there's still some beautiful cities and towns after this point, but I don't think anything really matches this hype going into Driftveil ever again. And I don't want to stop the music right now. I just kind of want to listen to it a little bit and get it. But there are also some version differences in, say, Opelousas City taking on a more futuristic city look in Pokemon Black or a more historical theme in White, which is something I'm surprised they've never done in the past, given we've always had two versions. It's not something they do very often. And there's also some major differences in the layout of towns like Icirrus in the winter versus the other seasons, with giant piles of snow that allow you to reach certain areas in multiple different ways and kind of traverse the town in a whole new way. And seasons are an all-new feature in this game that really change the appearance of a lot of the routes as well and how you navigate through them. But I think the routes in this game are something kind of get a bad reputation, and I think are actually another standout of this game. And usually this game has a pretty bad reputation for being a rather linear game in the shape of a circle, but I'd push back on that being an issue unless you're a geometry teacher. There's so many areas in the game that are somewhat optional at first, like the Relic Castle, that you don't need to go to on your first pass, but you get the option to get some new Pokemon and explore a bit. Twist Mountain is another section of the game that presents a quite confusing challenge trying to find the exit, and honestly I was surprised even as a 30-year-old adult how hard it was and how frustrated I got trying to find the exit in this damn place. I don't expect Metroidvania level design in a Pokemon game, but it's nice that they attempted to add some spice to exploration without just making the whole screen black and making it impossible to see where you're going. There's also a couple tower areas that I really love, especially Dragon Spiral Tower. There's something about this place that just sounds and feels like almost like a Zelda dungeon. It's so atmospheric and peaceful, almost like humans are not supposed to be here at all. But my favorite has to be Charged Stone Cave. It's pretty dope as you get to push around these electromagnetic rocks around, which is something that's much more welcome than, say, pushing around a bunch of boulders that require an HM. And that's a staple throughout this entire game. They really got rid of HM usage, especially on the main game path as you're going through the story, and most of the time you need an HM only to find secret areas or hidden items and whatnot, and do a little extra exploration, but it's almost barely required at all to get through the main game. And being hot off platinum, that is very, very, very welcome. But all this together makes Unova a much more calm and fun place to explore, even on repeat playthroughs, especially if you make your way through enjoying one of the best aspects of the game. You can't really talk about how fun it is to explore the world without talking about the main draw that keeps people playing the game, and that's the story and the characters, and we'll focus on the characters first, who this time around feel like actual people who care about the state of this region, are actively working on themselves and making the region a safer place. And two of the most important characters in Black and White are your new rival characters from your hometown. Cheren is smart and witty, and his goal is to be the ideal of strength in the region by becoming the Pokemon champion. And while Bianca lacks a bit of confidence, is trying to find her place in the world, and I think by themselves, they could be considered weak rivals, but they're not, and together they are the best example of not only this game's themes, but where a lot of teens are in their life. This is definitely an age where I think a lot of us are starting to confront not only what we want to be in life, but confronting our childhood expectations. Not all of us are going to be astronauts, doctors, or even champions. Some of us are going to have to play to our strengths and pursue that dream. And then you eventually realize you're partially unfulfilled by that dream in your 20s, because while you have a job that is cool in theory, the corporate world loves to ruin everything and fun about it. So instead you start a small YouTube channel talking about your favorite childhood games. Anyways, that's not me. We'll follow both Cheren and Bianca as they're confronted with the harsh reality of growing up. Cheren needs to realize that there's more to life than making your Pokemon into killing machines, and he's confronted periodically with the actual champion of the region, Alder. And Alder has gone through some shit. He's gone through a journey, he knows the truth of what it means to be the champion, but he's also suffering from the loss of his dear friend and his first Pokemon, as he's realized that destination means so little compared to the journey and the memories he made along the way, and now he's just kind of wandering the region lost. As a kid, I know I definitely thought Alder was kind of lame and sad because you don't get to fight him till the post-game and he just looks like a knockoff Jiraiya from Naruto. But now that I'm older, I definitely see him as a reminder that goals are not really what's important. They're not a place that you get to and live when you achieve them. They should be gateways to keep you on the right path while you experience life. And if you only have one goal and that's all that matters to you, you'll become lost once you reach it. He also has some really badass music. He jumps off cliffs. If this is what a midlife crisis looks like, I'm up for it. But then there's Bianca, who represents the lost young soul who wants to be someone and find their purpose, but it turns out she just kind of sucks at battling, which is the main purpose for most people in this world, and needs to come to terms with what that means for her journey and what her goals should be in life, and how hard it can be when people are telling you to do what they think you should do rather than trust you to make your own decisions. And for most of the game, she's just kind of trailing along, going to the gym leaders, and shadowing Professor Juniper, who I haven't mentioned too much up until this point, but she is the first female professor, because apparently we don't recognize Professor Ivy, you fucking heathens. But I mean, Juniper's pretty cool. She's definitely got that city girl, New Yorker look, and she's doing this weird JoJo pose every time she calls you through the X-transceiver. But besides the main cast, we also have a wonderful collection of gym leaders. Pretty much every leader at some point in this game has something to do with Team Plasma and trying to defeat them every time they enter their domain. And a couple of them show up afterwards as well, whether it's trying to stop Team Plasma from stealing a skull from a museum, to confronting Plasma at the Dragon Spiral Tower after demolishing this once untouched monument. And one of my favorites has to be Clay. It's always been Clay. Clay is one of my favorite characters in this entire game, the master of industry and the destroyer of weak-willed men, an American-inspired tycoon of business. So it actually turns out, while researching a bit, I learned a little bit about the design of these characters, especially Clay, who turns out so she's supposed to represent that Japanese immigrant coming to America to chase the good old Unovan dream. And I also found it funny that they mention he's supposed to be in contrast to Elisa, the hot robotic supermodel, for being a short and fat king. Shout out to the short and fat kings out there. But overall, I think they really cooked with pretty much all of these gym leader designs. And these are some of the best and cool looking gym leaders and characters in Pokemon in general. But their gyms are kind of cool, but they also suck. Fuck you, Skyla. But I have put it off long enough, and there's no way to go through this video without talking about one of the best and most beloved aspects of this game. Pokemon musicals. I'm just kidding. We're going to talk about the main plot and stuff that's fun, but Pokemon musicals were kind of cool. I like dressing up my Pokemon as a kid, and if you don't like that, you're a cultureless Philistine. Pretty early on in the game, you encounter Team Plasma, who is the villainous team of this region, but that's not their perspective, no. They claim to be all about Pokemon liberation, freeing all the suffering Pokemon from the grasp of abusive trainers and separating the bond between Pokemon and human for the good of both. It's the first time a Pokemon game has tried to present the antagonist team as a well-spoken advocates and not just antagonists, and I must commend the presentation of these games' early moments, because if you're not convinced of the whole nice guy speech that Gestus gives at the very beginning, it does introduce a lot of mystery. They're not blanketly saying, hey, I want to drown the planet, hee hee, or I want to nuke reality. It's much more subtle here. They're just trying to start a conversation, just hear us out a bit. Which I think is an interesting place to base a game, since it doesn't inherently mean we're going to be exploring good versus evil, just a difference in opinions, or even a difference in what you perceive as reality versus the truth of the situation. But I do think the game stumbles a bit here, and it never gives the idea enough time to really breathe, because even after the first speech that Gestus gives in that town hall area, about 30 minutes later, Plasma Grunts are trying to use a Muna to force their perspective on people by manipulating their dreams, and that's pretty fucked up, honestly. And that changes our perspective on Team Plasma from being simple, passionate protesters to full-blown Inception propagandists. And not all of this is bad, but just a little confusing at first, and I think the best part of the story lies with one specific character in Team Plasma. Ben is a mysterious kid with a lot more drip than you, because it's much harder to think of him as a bad guy. He's not just some evil adult, he's just another kid who has a different idea on what the relationship between Pokemons and humans be based off of his backstory, and N is probably the highlight of Black and White's story, if I'm being honest. He's genuinely one of the most interesting parts of these games, and his scenes are easily the most memorable as well. N isn't just another battle rival like Cheren or Bianca, or frankly any other rival to date in any other Pokemon games, who just blocks you until you fight them and then stomps away in frustration when you demolish them. He is also a rival in beliefs. Depending on the game you play, N's ideal is to create a world where humans and Pokemon can all be happy. As growing up, all N has seen is the suffering of the Pokemon around him. And your truth is silently standing in the way as proof of that Pokemon actually like being with humans, and the bond created between the two can be near unbreakable. And this creates a lot of tension between you as you push and pull on each other. That sounds a little weird. As you push and pull on each other's ideas with each other to create a conversation and to start that conversation back and forth. But I think the real breaking point where it gets really serious and truly sets the intensity of this game's story is here. At this moment, N challenges you to an ultimate duel that pits truth and ideals against each other, and how could you refuse, as this is not only a threat to change the world itself, but if you were to hypothetically lose, you as the player wouldn't even be able to continue playing the game. What a waste of $40. As what's a Pokemon game without the ability to harness the power of 6 devoted friends to conquer the game's challenges? And if it wasn't bad enough, the urgency and the stakes are even higher when Gestus meets you on the Two-Blind Bridge to reveal his true intentions to use N by controlling the public's opinion on Pokemon in order to become the only ones allowed to use the power of Pokemon to control the world. And I know I've heard a lot of people criticize Pokemon games in general for their plots being slow, but it's moments like this where I just have to disagree with that take. The pacing in this game is outstanding, and despite having some great moments so far, some of the best are still yet to come, including the moment where Alder fails to defeat N and N's castle rises and towers over the Pokemon League, and one of the best cinematics that Pokemon has ever created. When I was a kid, this was without a doubt the coolest thing of all time, and exploring N's castle is unlike any other experience or area that we've had in a Pokemon game. There's so much mystery to the castle itself. How did it get there? I mean, it's still to this day, it's so unfeasible how they could have a castle underneath the Pokemon League, but regardless of that, there's also places like N's room, which adds so much mystery and intrigue to the character. And there's these two girls that I still don't even know what their purpose or relevance is, but there's so much hype around this time, and it's also leading up to the end of the game. And the gym leaders also come to fight off the sages in another one of the most freaking epic cutscenes in the game. So shout out to these gym leaders who actually help. Not only do they look cool, but they act cool, and all the other regions need to take notes. All the other gym leaders need to take notes on what Unova's gym leaders are doing. And this all leads to the final confrontation atop the castle, as it's not only the end of this main story plot, but also leads to the end of the game itself. Something no other Pokemon game has done. There's always been that awkward moment after beating the villain team, where you just keep going until you see the end credits until you beat the Pokemon League, and it kind of lowers the urgency a little bit in that time period. But here, the climactic moments are right at the end of after you beat the Elite Four, and the game's story stays engaging all the way till its final moment. And after beating both N as well as Ghetsis, you have the grand finale of the game, where Ghetsis' plans are foiled and N is finally able to see your perspective for the very first time. He's finally able to reflect on his own journey and see past the false truths that Ghetsis and Team Plasma have been feeding him for their own selfish desires. And after one final zoom in on a half portrait of our rival now turned friend with some of the best music in the game, he bids us farewell. And that's the end of the main story, and there's still some side content to keep you busy afterward, but this is where the game truly peaks, and I can't praise this game enough for how well it handles these moments. Not only its excellent pacing, but I had a lot of time to reflect on this game's story after finishing, especially as I tried to understand when I first played this, what I felt and why I felt the way that I did. I think the biggest thing on why I maybe didn't enjoy this story the first time as much is that it's a little bit confusing. The idea of truth and ideal opposing one another is kind of poorly explained in the game, especially when you consider a character like N's wording changes depending on which version you play, but his goal ultimately stays the same. I remember thinking he was just a dumb and a huge hypocrite saying he wanted to stop people from using Pokemon, and here he is summoning the ultimate dragon Pokemon to do his bidding. But when you start paying a little bit more attention to things like the fact that he actually uses Pokemon in the routes when he does his rival battles, it adds a lot to the story. But I think in a weird way, what this game's story is trying to say is also the reason I didn't like it. I was a much more closed-minded teen back then, and Pokemon is awesome. Team Plasma's goals are stupid because Pokemon are awesome. How can someone's ideals be more important than the truth? The truth is absolute. And in a lot of ways, yes, in the strictest usage of that word, the truth is the truth. But fortunately or unfortunately, as I've grown older, I realized that to most people the truth doesn't really matter. And for some people, some ideals are so rooted in their very being that something that's truly their perspective on any given discussion actually becomes their truth, which is sometimes a more defensive way of trying to legitimize their perspective over someone else's. And while I don't want to veer off too much in the overworld, it's not lost to me how relevant this game, being based on America and the current state of America, and kind of honestly the world itself, and that makes it kind of painfully hilarious that this game is even more relevant than ever. And I guess ultimately what I take away from this game is a reminder that everyone is allowed to have their own perspective, and you can fight for that, but ultimately you need to be aware when you are potentially being manipulated by those, when there's always a Ghetsis behind the scenes feeding you those false truths to alter your perspective on the world. And for your own sake, hope that you are inevitably confronted and accepting of the truth. And I think that's why this story is so good and beloved by so many. It's so relatable and relevant to everyone and almost at any point in time. And even the reception of this game has been quite polarizing. For many people, it's considered lazy and dumb to remove all the old Pokemon from previous generations, or that the designs of Pokemons were rehashing old designs for a new generation. And I remember people hated the Vanillite line and the Trubbish lines. But I mean, look at this guy. He's got so much swagger in his animation, more than you do. But in an interview with Sugimori himself, he even stated that they created around 3 times more Pokemon than they had originally intended to actually use in the game. Which sounds like an insane and cutthroat process to narrow that down to the eventual list of about 156 Pokemon that we got. And that proves that they worked so hard to get these Pokemon designs right. And so, yeah, Pokemon Black and White story is pretty good, dang good, but even more, I think it's relevant to basically everything and everyone. Sure, it maybe could done a little bit better explaining some of those themes and ideas or changing the word choice a little bit, but if they ever did a remake of this game, I honestly wouldn't change most of it. And I have a whole new appreciation for the game's story now. But that's just my perspective on the game's story, and of course you're open to have your own. Given all that though, there is one thing at the back of my mind that I need to discuss, and that's why I think I truly have always loved this game and consider it one of the best in the franchise. The story in Gen 5 is great, and it's something I really appreciate now more than ever, but in the end it's only about 30 hours of your playthrough, and back in the day I played about 400 hours into this game. So what caused that? Why did I keep playing this game? Well, it was the sense of community I felt around this game and the battling. The visual presentation of the Gen 5 area is probably one of the biggest improvements ever, and I'm not just talking about the world itself of Unova, I'm talking about the Pokemon battling and just the sprite work that they've done for these Pokemon. It just feels so dynamic. So good, in fact, that many, including myself, would consider this the most advanced aesthetic for Pokemon battling that they have ever created. The gap in how fun and quick and engaging the battling in this game compared to any other in the series is monumental. The way that the Pokemon move and react when attacking and taking a hit feels so alive. How they undulate, how they chew gum, how they wiggle. It's almost an understatement to say these games have the best pixel art in the series, if not the entire DS, if not some of my favorite pixel art of all time. In the years since this game released, I've only ever wished for Pokemon to go back to this 2D sprite art style, and everything is so much faster when battling compared to the slow nature of the Gen 4 games. It doesn't look like too much of a change per se on the surface, but it feels so much more responsive, and when your Pokemon does launch an attack at an opposing mon, draining their health, it doesn't leave you with enough time to contemplate your existential thoughts of death, and as a teenager those come quite frequently. The AI and trainers are really improved, and in my last playthrough I found a lot of consistent difficulty throughout the entire game, which is something my darling Platinum even struggled to do with at times, as certain areas being a complete cakewalk only to have one of the hardest champions in the entire game. I'm not even embarrassed to admit that I blacked out a couple times getting too cocky playing this game. There's also new features like triple battling and rotation battles, which, okay, not everything is a hit in this game, but I will say back in the day I did kind of crave a little bit of a triple battle or two. Maybe I was a little bit of a weirdo, but I love the 3-on-3 environment. Maybe that's the Mario Hoops fan of me, forever longing for some three-way action. Hey yo, what the? But there's so many little details in the battling that makes it so much more engaging and hype. When you get to a gym leader and you get them down to their final Pokemon, a new intense variation of the theme starts to play and rewards you for just kicking their ass. And this is the first time in a Pokemon game I just poured an obscene amount of time taking in all the battling challenges in the game and dove into the mechanics. I tried them in the other past games. This is where I went crazy and probably overboard. I quickly mentioned something like the Battle Subway and how it was my life at one point, but to take on these challenges repeatedly, I spent probably over 100 hours just on playing the Battle Subway alone on my original save file. Other changes like infinite TM usage also made this whole process of developing cool Pokemon a lot easier. Now you can give any Pokemon you want to learn Earthquake or any move that you want, any number of times that you want to give them, and that makes team building just so much more accessible in this game. Around this time is also where I started to look up for videos on YouTube on how to build the best team that I could, creating Pokemon whose sole purpose was destruction. Spending all my time EV training my Pokemon while watching YouTube videos in the background, basically doing that every night, hours and upon hours. With all new features, when I did eventually meet my friends in battle with the Sea Gear function in this game, which is kind of RIP, not really that useful anymore, but this feature allowed you to battle anyone that was near you and anytime, anywhere in the overworld. You didn't have to go to a specific place to do that all the time. It's just too bad when you have a bunch of friends who are not into the inner workings of Pokemon battling. They can just basically destroy easily with a meager choice banded EV trained Basculin. Poor guys never stood a chance. Also, at this point they hadn't made the stupid decision to delete a bunch of Pokemon game from the roster. Sure, there's a limited amount of Pokemon that you can have in the main game, but in the post game, everyone was here. But And even then, the Pokemon that they did add to this game have to be some of my favorites today. I just love the Crocodile line. His design with the dark regions around his eyes resembling shades is what I basically use to know on almost every team when I've played this game. Darmanitan is another probably one of my top favorite fire-type Pokemon in the entire franchise. That massive large grin and flaming eyebrows just never ceases to put a smile on my face. And Whimsicott is this adorably cute fluff ball that I used for the first time around here that just kind of reminds me of a Korok that has joined a hair metal band or something. And Excedril basically broke the game originally when I was first playing this. I mean, if I wasn't playing at the highest levels, but if an Excedril got off a couple swords dances or something, he could basically sweep an entire team of legendary Pokemon at this time period. And the design of all the starters are probably some of my favorite and most consistent across all of the evolutions. But I will always be a loyal Oshawott fan for its unparalleled levels of just cuteness. But with all this, that made this game truly one of my most played to date, and this is really why I kept playing the game. And when I look back on my fond memories of Gen 5, it had a lot to do with just diving so deep headfirst into the battle mechanics and getting much more involved with competitive stuff, at least pretending like I was actually involved in competitive battling. I was never like good or really anything like that, but watching hours and hours of YouTubers doing nothing but just battling each other, I was just mesmerized by this game's aesthetic and its battle mechanics. So much so that I ended up not buying Black 2 and White 2 on release. Yeah, so sorry, I'm probably partially the reason that Pokemon went down the path that it did after those games, but I just loved this game so much, and I didn't want to start a file when this is the one where all my attention was and where all my Pokemon were. And if I had to get this all out there, because this generation really was so special to me for this reason in particular, and from this point on, I've just I've resented Game Freak for just changing up the direction of the visual style and eventually even the implementation of new mechanics. And I'll talk about those more when I eventually get to those games, because while I did enjoy some things like Mega Evolution that was added, which was pretty cool in Gen 6, Z-moves, I hated that shit, and Dynamaxing was even worse for how slow it made the game. And Generation 5 represents this time where I truly felt that we just had such pure battling and had loads of fun playing the game, where you didn't need to worry about all that extra stuff that's generation specific. It was so pure, and I loved it for that, and that's why I'm so fond of this game. But now we do have one final question. Is Pokemon Black and White peak? Well, that's a hard question to definitively answer, at least as a collective truth about this game's status. For me, it's one of the best video games ever created, but it's also not my favorite Pokemon game, mostly due to the intense levels of nostalgia I have for the earlier games, and that could very well be the same for you or even the opposite. But what I think we can all agree on is this game was a bold formation of all the games that came before it. It defined the simple structure of about 150 Pokemon that was created in Generation 1. It had a shit ton of content to do in the game like Generation 2. It had a booming soundtrack and quick battles like Generation 3. It had all those lovely atmospheric elements and good music from Generation 4, all culminating in the creation of this beautiful Pokemon game right here, learning and acting on all of those lessons learned from all those previous generations. Is it the peak? Well, just look at the fucking diagram I made for you. I mean, does it look like a ditch to you? No, it's a fucking pyramid. I know a lot of people will say that Pokemon games are just a product for us to consume and make Nintendo money and Game Freak money, but these games right here had so much heart, and I was really astounded how much enjoyment I got from playing this game. And fuck, I'll be honest, it took me like 3 damn weeks to write this damn script, but I know it's probably not the best video on Pokemon Black and White ever, but I did pour all my heart into thinking about all the past fun I had with this game, as well as the new fun that I had on this recent playthrough, more than ever before. And I have 3 dead scripts on this shit, so thank you for sticking around to the end. I had so much fun reminiscing about the good old days and playing this game again, and this was the hottest shit on the market back in the time. But with that being said, I bid you